So after writing a book on a monk of 12th century Japan, I was kind of interested in going back to my comparative interests that had been sort of fueled when I was at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I had read several books that I'll call History of God books. Karen Armstrong wrote a book called literally The History of God. Robert Wright wrote a book called The Evolution of God. And basically they are tracing how God was conceptualized over time through the primary monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they talk about how the way God was conceptualized in those traditions evolved and changed over time. I thought that was fascinating, but what was clearly missing to me in reading those books was a whole nother part of the world that has its own conceptions of what I ended up calling ultimate reality, or what might be called the ultimate, that are different from the monotheistic conception of God, but that also evolve over time. So one of my intentions in that book is basically to show, for those who are most familiar with Western traditions or monotheistic traditions, how other traditions, particularly those of Asia that I'm familiar with, conceptualize what we might think of as the equivalent to God. So that was one sort of objective in that book. Another was to sort of show people that the way God evolves in the monotheistic traditions has parallels to the way conceptions of ultimacy evolve in traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism and Chinese religions, that there's a similar sort of principle going on. And so then a third sort of objective in writing that book was to create some dialogue, because I spend a chapter looking at the evolution of God within Judaism and Christianity, and then I move to Hinduism and Buddhist traditions. And so there is sort of something to be learned, I think, from both sides of that dialogue between those traditions. And I don't mean to sort of throw all of Asian traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism under the same umbrella, because they're very distinct. And when you get to China, you see even Chinese religion is quite distinct from Indian religions. But there are some similar principles that I think those of us from the monotheistic traditions can learn from. And similarly, there are elements of the monotheistic traditions, particularly their ethical emphasis, that the Asian traditions can learn from. So that's overall, those are sort of the three main things I was trying to accomplish in that study.